The sign went up at noon, a square of rough board nailed crooked to the ranch's fence, the words carved by a steady hand. Cook wanted. Honest pay. Honest work. The sun glared hard over Twin Mesas Ranch, bleaching the letters until they looked like ghosts on wood. The man who posted it, Ethan Rourke, stood back, dusted his palms, and studied the horizon. He was a man of few words and fewer smiles, but his eyes held years of storms and stories. His ranch had survived droughts, wolf raids, and bad winters, but this season it suffered something worse. Silence. The kind that fills a house too big for one man. Before an hour passed, a wagon rolled slow along the dry creek road. The mule was thin, the wheels creaked, and the woman holding the reins sat straight though she looked bone-tired. Beside her, a boy, maybe 12, stared out like he was ready to fight the wind if it came too close. Two smaller faces peeked from under a patched tarp. A girl with wide gray eyes and a toddler half asleep against a sack of grain. Ethan watched from the porch. He could tell by the way the woman handled those reins that she'd done more work than any man on the trail. Her dress was faded, the hem torn. She had the kind of beauty that lived quiet, not polished, not soft, but steady like a flame that refused to go out. She pulled the mule to a stop at the gate and climbed down, dust clinging to her skirt. "Sir?" she called, voice firm but polite. "I saw your notice. I can cook. I can mend, clean, and ride if need be. I've 3 children. We don't need charity, just work and a roof that doesn't leak." Ethan looked at her a long moment. "Name?" "Maeve Kearney," she said. "This here's Liam, Nora, and Davy." The boy squared his shoulders. The little ones peeked shyly from behind her skirt. Ethan nodded once. "Follow me." Inside the kitchen, Maeve opened cupboards and found 3 pans, 1 pot, and a loaf of stale bread. She nodded to herself as if it would do. Within an hour, she had a fire roaring and the smell of onions and coffee filling the air. By sunset, there was stew bubbling in the pot and biscuits baking on the grate. The bunkhouse men trailed in, drawn by the scent, their faces cracked with road dust and disbelief. When they tasted that stew, they didn't speak, just ate like starving wolves. Ethan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching Maeve move with quiet purpose. Her hands were strong, her eyes tired but alive. Her children sat at the corner of the table, eating like they hadn't in days. Liam caught Ethan's gaze, cautious, testing, and Ethan gave the boy a single nod. After supper, Maeve washed the dishes while the little ones dozed near the stove. She turned to Ethan and said softly, "Your notice said honest pay and honest work. I'll give you both. You'll get both," Ethan replied. $30 a month and board. "Work starts before sunrise," she smiled faintly. "I've been up before sunrise most my life." When she finally went to settle her children in the small bunk room off the kitchen, Ethan stepped out onto the porch. The prairie stretched dark and endless, the stars sharp as broken glass. For the first time in years, he heard laughter inside his house, light, small, real, and just as he was thinking maybe this year would be kinder than the last, a lone rider stopped at the end of the drive. The horse snorted uneasy. The rider leaned forward, his voice a drawl carried by the wind. "Evening, Rourke. Heard you got new help. A pretty widow and a couple brats, they say. Seems news travels fast." Ethan's hand rested near his holster, though he didn't move. "You got business, say it." The rider chuckled. "Maybe later. Just making sure you know. Not everything out here's friendly." As he rode off into the dusk, Maeve's shadow appeared in the doorway behind Ethan, drawn by the sound. She asked nothing. He said nothing. But both stood listening to the wind that carried the promise, or threat, of trouble coming. Morning came gray and restless over Twin Mesas. A cold wind whistled through the fence posts, carrying the smell of dust and rain that wasn't ready to fall. Maeve was already in the kitchen before daylight. Sleeves rolled, apron tied tight, her hands working steady over dough. The clatter of the pump handle echoed faint in the stillness, and the scent of coffee slipped through the house like a promise. Her children were awake too. Liam hauling wood, Nora folding blankets, and little Davy chasing the kitten that had made the barn its home. Ethan Rourke stepped in with the chill of dawn clinging to him. He paused at the doorway, watching them. For years, that kitchen had been a room of silence, of meals eaten without talk. Now there was the sound of children, the scrape of spoons, a woman humming low as she worked. It unsettled him in a way that wasn't unpleasant. As they sat to breakfast, Maeve said, "You've got a good ranch, Mr. Rourke, but it feels like a man fighting it alone." He looked at her quiet. "Been that way a long time." "Don't have to be," she said simply, passing him the coffee. Outside, the sun burned pale through thin clouds. But by noon, the wind turned mean, kicking dust into the sky. Ethan watched the horizon, where a dark line gathered low and wide. "Storm brewing," he muttered. "Big one." Just then, hoofbeats sounded down the road. 3 riders. The one in front sat too easy in the saddle, his coat black and well-tailored, a gold chain glinting at his vest. When he pulled up at the gate, his grin was all charm and no warmth. "Morning, Rourke," he called. "Heard you hired new help. Figured I'd ride by and introduce myself." "Cade Talbot out of Dry Creek." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd heard the name, a man who made fortunes buying desperate land and breaking men too proud to sell. "What do you want, Talbot?" Cade's grin widened. "Oh, nothing but neighborly business. I'm buying water rights up and down this valley. Figured you might want to sell before things get dry." He glanced toward the kitchen window where Maeve's face could be seen behind the curtain. "And maybe to meet the lady folks been whispering about. New cook, right?" Ethan stepped forward, boots heavy in the dust. "My ranch, my people." "Not your business," Cade chuckled, tipping his hat. "Suit yourself, cowboy." But the desert's got a way of changing men's minds. The sky darkened fast, thunder muttering like distant cannon fire. The first drops hit before Cade and his men turned back. "You best tie down everything," Cade called, smirking. "The storm's coming, and not just the one from the clouds." By the time the rain broke, it came sideways. The wind screamed through the corrals, tearing shingles loose. Ethan and Liam ran to the barn, fighting to drag the horses in before the lightning split the sky. Maeve held the door against the gusts, her dress plastered to her legs, shouting orders no man dared ignore. Through the roar, Ethan saw it. Cattle pushing against the far fence, spooked. He shouted to Liam, "The gate!" And together they fought the storm like soldiers, mud up to their knees, thunder cracking over their heads. By the time the worst passed, both were soaked and shivering, but the herd still stood. Inside, Maeve had fire roaring in the stove, blankets laid near the hearth, coffee boiling. She took one look at Liam's torn hands and set to cleaning them, no questions asked. Ethan watched her, saying nothing. But in his chest, something heavy and quiet began to shift. As they sat in the glow of the fire, Maeve spoke softly. "That man today, Cade Talbot. I've heard his name before. He's the one who took my husband's land after the drought. Said he'd help. Left us with nothing but a grave and a wagon." Ethan's jaw set. "He won't take this place." Maeve met his eyes. "Then we stand together." Thunder rumbled far off, fading into distance, but its echo stayed in their bones. The storm had passed, but both knew it was only the first. The next morning broke bright and cold. The storm had washed the world clean, leaving puddles in the wagon ruts and a scent of wet sage drifting across the valley. Maeve stepped outside with a pail in hand, the ground soft beneath her boots. Behind her, the children were laughing, Nora chasing Davy with a wooden spoon, Liam trying to fix a bent hinge on the barn door like a man twice his age. Ethan watched from the corral, his hat tipped low, pretending not to smile. He hadn't heard that kind of laughter on this ranch in years. It made the silence that followed all the heavier when a rider appeared from the east. It was Jesse, one of Ethan's hands who'd ridden into town the night before. He swung off his horse, face tight. "Boss," he said, "word's all over Dry Creek. Cade Talbot's telling folks he's coming for twin Mesas. Says you owe him a debt for that old fence contract last winter. And he's claiming the widow you hired ain't who she says she is." Maeve froze in the doorway, the pail clattering to the ground. "He's lying," she said quietly. "He's done it before." Ethan's voice came calm but sharp. "No one here's asking for proof. You and your children stay where you are. This ranch don't bow to threats." That afternoon, Maeve set to work as if nothing had changed. She kneaded dough, stirred beans, chopped onions. Yet her movements carried a kind of fever. the rhythm of someone trying to outrun memory. Ethan stayed close, fixing the fence, keeping the rifle near but not visible. As dusk fell, neighbors began arriving. First old Mrs. Jensen with her cane and a loaf of molasses bread, then a Mexican vaquero named Rafael, who brought a sack of dried chiles, and finally a Lakota couple from the nearby arroyo. They'd heard whispers, too. "Cade is buying men like cattle," Rafael said, shaking his head. "He wants the water rights, and he'll burn what he can't buy." Ethan looked at Maeve. "Then we eat together tonight," he said. "If he means to scare us, he'll see we ain't alone." Maeve nodded, her eyes fierce. She dragged 2 sawhorses into the yard and laid planks across them for a table. She roasted meat, mashed potatoes, fried bread till the air shimmered with warmth and spice. The children carried out dishes, lanterns swinging. Before long, the yard glowed with light, a circle against the dark. As they ate, stories began to flow, of storms survived, wells dug by hand, and dreams built from nothing. Maeve listened, smiling for the first time since she'd arrived. Then, when silence settled, she spoke. "Cade Talbot ruined my husband," she said softly. "He tricked him with false papers, took our land when the crops failed. When I buried him, Cade came back to claim the house, said it was business. I took the children and left with what we could carry. He told me I'd never make it past winter." No one spoke for a moment. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, whispering like old ghosts. Then Mrs. Jensen set her gnarled hand on Maeve's shoulder. "Well, he was wrong," she said. "You made it here, and you're not alone anymore." Liam lifted his chin, pride bright in his young face. "If that man comes again," he said, "he'll have to go through all of us." Ethan looked around the table, at the neighbors, at Maeve's children, at the light flickering over their tired faces. Something inside him settled. "This ranch belongs to no man but those who keep it alive," he said. "We'll meet him standing." Later, when the guests had gone and the lanterns burned low, Maeve stepped onto the porch. The night was wide, the stars cold and watchful. Ethan joined her, quiet as ever. "You shouldn't have to fight again," he said. She looked toward the horizon where the dark hills crouched like waiting beasts. "Maybe not," she said. "But if he comes, this time I'm not running." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then he'll find out what happens when a storm meets stone." 3 days later, Cade Talbot returned. The morning was too still, the air holding its breath. Maeve had been kneading bread when she heard the sound of hooves, slow, deliberate, like a drumbeat before battle. She looked up from the kitchen window and saw him, Cade, dressed in a fine black coat that didn't belong to this land, papers in hand, and that same easy grin painted on his face. Ethan stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're not welcome here, Talbot," he said, voice even. Cade laughed softly. "That's a mighty unfriendly greeting, Rourke. I brought an opportunity. Water rights, north pasture, fair trade for the both of us. I even had my lawyer write it all proper." He waved the papers in the air. "Sign this and you'll never worry about drought again." "And if I don't?" Ethan asked. Cade's smile turned thin. "Then when the dry months come and your cattle start dropping, you'll wish you had. And maybe that pretty widow of yours will be looking for work again. I hear she's a good cook." Before Ethan could answer, Maeve pushed open the kitchen door and stepped onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands. Her eyes were steady, her chin high. "You leave this land and the people on it be," she said. "You've already taken enough from us." Cade turned his gaze on her, smirk curling cruel. "Ah, Mrs. Kearney, I was wondering when you'd speak. Your late husband signed contracts same as this. Didn't read the fine print. Cost him dearly? Seems history repeats." "Not this time," Maeve said quietly. "We know what kind of man you are." "Then prove it," Cade said, stepping forward. "Let's read it out loud. Right here, in front of everyone." By then, the ranch hands had gathered near the barn, watching. Liam stood behind his mother, fists balled, eyes full of anger too big for his age. Mrs. Jensen came hobbling down the lane, her cane tapping like a drumbeat. And the Lakota family arrived soon after, silent but strong. Word had spread. They all knew what this was. Ethan took the papers and unfolded them, his eyes scanning line after line. The ink gleamed slick in the sun. "This isn't about water," he said finally. "It's about control. You're asking for permanent rights to cross our land, to build storage, to use our pasture, to claim anything that touches your line." Cade's tone sharpened. "That's business, Rourke. The West runs on contracts, not feelings." Maeve stepped closer, her voice firm. "And hearts run on truth, not greed." She turned to the gathered crowd. "This man took my home once with the same kind of paper. I won't let him take another." Cade's mask cracked. "Careful, widow. You don't want to make enemies." Ethan stepped forward, eyes cold as the creek in winter. "She's not alone," he said. "None of us are." For a long, tense moment, silence held them all. Then Liam, his voice breaking but strong, said, "You best go, mister, before we decide you ain't worth talking to." Cade looked around, at the men, at the neighbors, at Maeve standing straight as an iron post, and saw he'd lost the crowd. His smirk faltered. "You'll regret this," he said, mounting his horse. "This land's dry, and dry land breeds desperation." "Then you'd best stay thirsty," Maeve said, her tone calm as a prayer. Cade glared once more and rode off, dust curling behind him like smoke. No one spoke until he was gone. Then Mrs. Jensen chuckled low. "I'd say that man just met a storm bigger than himself," she muttered. That night, the ranch house glowed with lamplight. The long table was full again. Bread, stew, laughter. A celebration not of victory, but of unity. Ethan watched Maeve move between the guests, her smile small but real, her eyes shining with something fierce and alive. When the neighbors finally left, the two of them stood alone on the porch. The moonlight washed the land silver. Ethan turned to her. "He'll come back," he said. "Then we'll be ready," Maeve replied. "You can't kill greed, but you can starve it." She looked out toward the dark horizon, then back at him. "We've got food, hands, and hearts enough." "That's what he'll never understand." Ethan nodded. "You've got courage enough for this whole valley." "No," she said, soft but certain. "We've all got just enough for each other." Winter came to Twin Mesas like a quiet thief. One morning the world was white, fences buried halfway, the pump handle frozen stiff. The men worked with scarves up to their eyes, breaking ice for the horses, hauling wood to the kitchen door. Inside, Maeve's stove glowed like a sun. She kept coffee on the boil, bread rising under a towel, and soup, thick enough to chase away the cold. The ranch had changed since she'd come. Laughter filled the bunkhouse, and even the wind seemed to whistle softer when it passed through. Liam had learned to mend tack and rope calves without flinching. Nora helped with the cooking, her voice always humming some tune. Little Davy followed Ethan everywhere, dragging his tiny boots through the snow, pretending to be a ranch hand. One night after supper, when the others had gone to bed, Maeve sat mending shirts by the fire. Ethan lingered by the window, watching the storm outside. He spoke without turning. "You know, before you came, this house never felt alive. Just walls and wind." She looked up. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now it feels like something worth protecting." Maeve's eyes softened. "You've done more than protected, Ethan. You've given it a heartbeat." For a long time, the only sound was the ticking of the stove. The storm howled outside, shaking the shutters, but inside, it was warm. The kind of warmth that comes from shared struggle, not comfort. A few days later, a rider came through the snow, the Norwegian trapper who sometimes traded with the ranch. He brought news. Cade Talbot was back in Dry Creek, trying to rally men to his cause. "He'd talk about new railroad spur," the trapper said. "Say it will run through your north pasture." He planned to claim it before spring. Ethan's jaw tightened. "He never quits." Maeve's gaze was calm. "Then neither do we." They gathered the neighbors again. Mrs. Jensen, Raphael, the Lakota family, a few ranchers who'd once been wary, but now stood close. By lamplight, they planned. If Cade tried to claim the land, they'd show the truth. That Twin Mesas was no longer one ranch, but a community, bound by hands, not papers. The weeks passed. The snow melted slow, the ground softening beneath the hooves. One dawn, Maeve found Ethan fixing the north fence where the creek curved toward the ridge. She walked up, holding something small in her palm, her wedding ring. "This was once a reminder of what I lost," she said. But now it reminds me what I found. She handed it to him. Keep it for now. 'Tis spring. If we're still standing, maybe I'll wear it again. He took it carefully, his thumb brushing the dull gold. I'll keep it safe, he said. Right here. He slipped it into his vest pocket like a vow. Spring came early that year. The grass turned green before the thaw was done. Cade returned once more, alone this time. He rode to the gate and stopped, his face leaner, meaner. Rourke, he called. The railroad's coming. I've got deeds. This land's mine by law. Ethan didn't move from the porch. You can wave paper all you want, he said. But this land's got more than ink keeping it alive. It's got people. Maeve stepped out beside him, her children behind her, and then, one by one, the neighbors appeared. Mrs. Jensen with her cane, Raphael on horseback, the Lakota family with bows slung across their backs, the Norwegian trapper leaning on his shovel. Cade's eyes darted from one face to the next. You can't fight progress, he said. Maeve's voice was steady. We're not fighting progress. We're fighting thieves. He laughed once, hard, bitter, then turned his horse. One day you'll need what I've got, he said. We already have what we need, Ethan replied. Each other. Cade spurred his horse and rode off into the wind. No one followed. That evening, as the sun sank over the mesas, the ranch gathered for supper. Maeve set the long table again, her hands moving with grace born of survival. When the children were asleep, Ethan took out the ring and placed it on the table between them. Spring's here, he said. We're still standing. She looked at the ring, then at him, and smiled. The first true smile he'd ever seen from her. Then I reckon it's time, she said, slipping it back on her finger. The fire crackled soft, the prairie wind whispering through the eaves. Outside, the stars were bright and near, like witnesses to a promise kept.